Last week, I was privileged to spend around 12 hours with Dr. Joshua Maponga while he was visiting Kenya. He was here in Kenya to receive a special award, and he was awarded the Pan-Africanist of the Year 2025 by the Africa Revival. And I want to share with you the 7 key lessons that I learned after spending some few hours with him. That is maybe from around 9 a.m. till to 9 p.m. in the evening. And surprisingly, most of these lessons and the key principles that Joshua Maponga was actually articulating while speaking, while interacting with him. And I noticed I really share a lot with him because I've been a keen follower of his speeches and everything that he's been talking about. Plus, my own conviction, actually, I noticed we share a lot in common. And today I want to just share a summary of the 7 key things that Dr. Joshua Maponga was talking about while he was in Kenya. And most of his speeches, you'll notice that these are the key things that he really stresses. And just to quickly go through them, and I'm sure if you are a keen follower of current affairs, history, colonialism, matters religion, matters development, matters economics, matters unemployment, and all these problems that are bedeviling Africa, you'll realize that Dr. Joshua Maponga actually presents a lot of practical solutions, and he is also drawing from the past. He looks at our African traditional societies, our structures before a colonial era, and probably these are the things we should strongly consider. So quickly, let us just look at these key things that Dr. Joshua Maponga was speaking strongly while he was in Kenya on Friday, and I think he was here from Tuesday up to this Monday. And let us go straight to it. The first thing Dr. Joshua Maponga was actually reiterating or strongly articulating while speaking. I interviewed him and I noticed he has very strong opinion and conviction on matters education and knowledge, because Dr. Joshua Maponga believes that for every African, you must be able to look back what was really working in Africa before the advent of colonialism. And you'll notice that our African education and knowledge system was very practical. It was it was experiential. You were able to learn things progressively while still young as you grow old, and so on and so on. Most of the education or the knowledge that was passed down through the generations was done by our parents, passed on to the children, and as the children interacted with other people in the society, a lot of knowledge was passed on. Also through culture, through arts, through practical things, through songs and everything, and all the crafts that Africans used to design and produce. It was laced with a lot of knowledge and education. Actually, we had our own traditional education systems that were working perfectly during those times. Unfortunately, when the colonial system took over, it destroyed all these traditional systems or the indigenous knowledge and education systems that we used to have. For instance, older women used to mentor young girls, and elderly men or the elders in the community used to mentor young boys, and this mentorship was very practical. If it is protecting your community, you are taught how to protect yourself, and so on. So one of the key things that Dr. Joshua Maponga spoke about, articulated about while here in Kenya, was revisiting or relooking at the education and knowledge systems that we Africans had nurtured for many years, and how we can use it and maybe contextualize it in the current systems, and avoid the modern system that is demeaning of African education, African knowledge, and all that. So we should revisit the indigenous knowledge systems that used to work very well and see how we can harness them. And so going to the second point that Maponga was really strongly pushing, and I agree with him strongly too, because I've been a keen observer of the economy, the business world, the economic system that is currently running the entire world, which is very capitalistic, which concentrates wealth in the 1% of the population, while the 99% of the entire population is suffering. So the capitalistic nature of this economy that is running currently, that you are currently under, is quite oppressive, and it's quite disadvantageous to Africans. And so on business and economics, Maponga said that the financial systems that are currently in place is very oppressive to the African people. For instance, looking at even the kind of loans, we, the African nations, when we borrow loans, we borrow them at a very high interest rates, and if you default, it becomes even worse because your national assets are at risk of being taken away. But looking at the traditional economic and business systems that we used to have in our communities before. For instance, if I am growing old, I'm a strong young man and I want to get married, and I don't have, maybe my father is not very rich, I could obviously just borrow 2 cows from my uncles, or just one cow from my uncle, and keep it. And that was some kind of capital, and I was not required to return the cow with an additional like 2 cows after like 5 years. No, I was just given the cow maybe for 2-3 years, and I will return the cow after taking care of it, nurturing it, ensuring it that it multiplies, and I could get milk. I could get additional capital to do whatever I wanted to do. So the traditional systems that we, the African people, had in terms of business and economics was very sustainable. And this is one of the things, or the key area, that Dr. Joshua Maponga was really stressing. And I also agree with him fully. So on business and economics, the current system actually encourages use of paper money. For instance, the dollar is used globally, but the US has the monopoly to print even more dollars. They could print as much paper money they wish, and they just come to Africa and just purchase whatever gold amounts they want to purchase. They can purchase land, because the entire global economy is relying on these paper money on the dollars. So it's very disadvantageous to African economies, especially African currencies. And so I agree with him fully when he says that we need to look at how to come out of this crazy system, or manage this system so that it's not very oppressive to us. We need to spend more time nurturing the assets that we have. For instance, in the villages, you could ensure that every person has a piece of land that is working on it, producing food, and ensuring that he does not rely on cash to get food. Because whenever you rely on cash to get food, it means whenever you don't have that cash, you are likely to suffer, you are likely to starve, and you are likely to die. And that is what paper money is actually causing right now in Africa. We are all being taught to over-rely on paper money, which is a very risky affair. We need to diversify, look at our lands, look at our small village economies, and how it can sustain us as we move forward. So the third point Dr. Joshua Maponga really stressed, and even if you look at his speeches, I'll post the link to some of his speeches while in Nairobi, and he was talking about land ownership. If you are a man in Africa, or let's just say, if you don't own land, it means you don't own the primary factor of production, which is land. You don't have the ability to produce. You cannot produce food. You cannot set up whatever you want to set up. You cannot build. You cannot have housing. Without land, actually, you are just poor. So the more we don't own land, the more we are at risk of poverty and being destroyed economically. So Dr. Joshua Maponga actually stressed the point that every man in this society, in the African soil, Africa is rich with lots of land, unutilized land, and men should first impregnate the first wife, which is the land. And I find that statement very correct. I agree fully with him. And that is a very strong lesson that we ought to learn, all of us. Because if you don't have land, how will you produce food? How will you build your home? If you are a young man, what else? What is the most important thing that you should be owning as a man? Also as a woman, because nowadays women can own land, but as a man, because the man is the head of the family, you must own land. You must strive to own land. That is a very strong point that Dr. Joshua Maponga really endeavored to explain to Africans, that first, make use of the land. I know most of us are working in the cities. I'm also in the city, but twice every month I must go back home and look at how things are, look at the land, look at how I can make the land productive, or support my parents, produce more from the land, or at least invest regularly on land, because land is a factor of production that cannot be duplicated, cannot be multiplied. It is an asset that is always shrinking unless you move to a place that land is very cheap. But everywhere land is appreciating, even in Kenya, even in Africa, all over the world. I guess in most of the places that people would love to live and can live well, land is a fast appreciating asset. So without land, there's nothing you are talking about. In Kenya, we have many people who have land and they are not making use of the land. In Africa, we know there are so many, the most productive pieces of land are not owned by Africans, and that is a very risky affair. And so Dr. Joshua Maponga was saying, what is the point of being in a country, being a citizen of a country, and you can't own land, or the land is owned by other people? Huge chunks of land is being controlled by other people, who are not even Africans. So it's a very risky affair. And I feel what Dr. Joshua Maponga is trying to say, because he is a Pan-Africanist, he is a strong advocate of Pan-Africanism, African consciousness, and I agree with him. Without land, there's nothing. Without ownership of land, you can't do nothing. You can't do nothing. So let's go to the fourth point. Dr. Joshua Maponga also looked at the governance and colonial systems that have been in place maybe since the early 20th century. And actually, looking at our traditional governance and political systems that were in place in Africa before, you can see clearly that democracy was not a political system or a governance system that was used primarily in Africa. And you can see that the current system, which is democracy, I doubt if it's really working, because democracy is constantly producing a chaotic political environment, a toxic, high voltage political contests whereby everyone wants to win, and there is no consistency, because every 5 years you are trying to get new leaders. We elect a leader today, he makes a lot of promises. After 1 year, we expect him to have changed everything, to have made some miracles, and it's obvious that democracy is not really working so well. I'm not saying that we revert back to dictatorship, because the problem is that people, when you say democracy is not working, people just assume that you are suggesting that we try dictatorship. That is not the point. The point is, African societies had their own governance and political systems that were working very nicely. And looking at how we used to have our leaders, how our leaders used to govern communities before these borders were drawn, you can see clearly that these communities had chiefs or kings, and these kings had enough time to plan or to rule a certain territory, supported by council of elders and so on. And so we did not have the problem of a vacuum or the desire to plan or the need to start electing new leaders. And in democracy, everyone has a vote. And my personal opinion is that democracy will never work because it's the say of the majority. And out of 10, many people are not able to identify the right person who can be the best leader. The process of identifying, on selecting and appointing leaders into position is very chaotic. It depends on personal interests. It depends also on the most appealing candidate and so many other factors. Combine also this with diversity, and you'll clearly see that democracy will never work. We are just slowly progressing. Compare democracy with monarchies like the UK. The UK have a predictable leadership system whereby they know their leader is the king, and the king has delegated some powers or some authority to various levels of governments or some kind of structure whereby people can still vote. But ultimately, that we have a leader, and there can be no vacuum. So comparing these monarchies or these countries like the UK, the Netherlands, and other places, at least somehow there's a balance between monarchy system and also democracy. So, but in Africa, leadership was quite in consensus. It was not about one person leading. It was about people meeting, maybe clan elders. They form a community council of elders, and then these council of elders will just agree on one person to be the chief, and that was it. And the chief had enough time or the king had enough time to rule, to plan, and to govern. So electing leaders every 5 years in a democratic system, I don't think it's producing the best results compared to if we could have another alternative. So democracy actually is very hard. It's not really working well in Africa. It's chaotic. It's a cycle of chaos, political competition. Every 5 years we are running up and down, spending a lot of money. Our leaders spending all the time trying to amass more wealth for the next election, forgetting even to work for the people. So it's a mess. We need to relook at the entire thing, the entire process of identifying and appointing leaders into various positions. So the fifth point that Dr. Joshua Maponga was really trying to articulate is politics and leadership, which I've also touched on it a bit. And the biggest issue that Maponga actually tried to point out is the 5-year cycle of hectic, expensive, high voltage political competition that Africans are being subjected. In some places, even people kill each other. In some places, the entire thing might have to be relooked altogether. And then the sixth one is agriculture and sustainability of our communities. Remember that agriculture is the backbone of every economy. If we can't produce food to eat, actually we have no business living. If we cannot feed ourselves as families, as a village, as a community, as a country, it means we are not able to survive any calamity. In case of any problem, we are not able to survive. And so, relooking at how our indigenous knowledge with regards to agriculture used to sustain us is very important. Because nowadays, there is what we call food colonization. We are seeing many places where policies and laws are being enacted to deny people the right to have their own seeds to plant and then collect the seeds from those plants, preserve them, and use them for the next season. Because food colonization or seed colonization is a very is a very it's a life and death issue. And so if Africans are not able to secure their ability to produce food sustainably means you can produce enough to eat, you are guaranteed to have seeds and inputs for the next season. It means also the food is safe to eat, it's organic, it's natural, it's not contaminated. But the current system is actually denying us organic food. We are seeing a lot of GMO seeds being flooded in the market, a lot of regulations that will eventually favor these GMO seeds and GMO foods, which is actually a destruction of the African communities. So that is a very serious and very important thing to look at. And sustainability means if you don't own land, you are not able to grow your food freely. Sustainability also means you are not sure how you will plant the next season. We are not sure where this food come from. We are not sure whether the food that you cannot grow can be available cheaply from another place. So the entire system is quite messed, and he's suggesting that we, the Africans, need to look at our indigenous knowledge and see how this used to work and how we can use it to be sustainable and produce more food sustainably. And then the last one that Dr. Joshua Maponga is well known for is a return to our spiritual heritage as Africans. Without spirituality and without our system of ethics, it means we are done. We are totally done. And I normally say, and I believe that, or I know that the moment we lost our spiritual compass is the moment we lost everything. We actually lost everything the moment we started embracing foreign religions and discarding our spiritual foundations. I'm saying this because personally I reverted back to my Kalenjin spirituality, and I call myself Asiisian, and we have a large number of Kalenjins right now who are embracing their true spirituality. And so the moment you lose your spiritual identity, it means you've delegated your spiritual direction, your spiritual compass to another person totally. So what Maponga said regarding to this, he said that we need to go back to our spiritual systems as Africa. We no longer need to rely on imported religions, and I fully agree with him, and I have no apologies about that. I am truly Asiisian, and I believe the moment we reclaim our spiritual identity, that is the moment we will reclaim everything else, and everything else is going to fall in place. Yeah. And those are the 7 key things Maponga dwelled on, or the things that I noticed the key lessons. The key lessons were around education and knowledge, business and economics, land and ownership of land, governance and colonial systems that are quite oppressive to the African people until today, politics and leadership. We need to relook at how we are managing our politics. Are we good with democracy? Can we customize or contextualize our democracy, because that is the dominant political system now? We need to relook at it. And also, the 6th one is agriculture and sustainability of how we produce food, how we preserve food, how we store our seeds, and how we are guaranteed to have food on the table every day. And the last one is spirituality and our ethics and our values and our belief system. And I suggest or I strongly recommend every one of us to look at spirituality as the first thing that we can restore. Once we are able to restore our spirituality, I believe we will be able to restore everything else. We do not have to isolate ourselves as Africans outside the world, but we need to have our act together. We need to know who we are, where we come from, and then decide how we are going to move forward into the future. So thank you so much for listening, and you can watch Dr. Joshua Maponga's videos on my channel, And thank you for listening and watching. Kindly subscribe and drop your comments and let's discuss. Thank you.